Welcome back to the Worst Is Yet to Come podcast. I'm Andrew, and I'm joined this week with my co-host Harry.
What's up, man?
So we're gonna kind of jump back into our series we're doing on George Washington. So a quick little review of what happened was in the last episode, episode 8, we talked about the early life of George Washington, his early military career within the British colonial militia, and now we're kind of jumping into the interwar period and into the American Revolution. So if you want to start us off with that, Harry.
Yeah, so uh, as you're saying, we ended with Washington's. He was a colonial officer in the uh, with the Virginia Regiment, and he helped to build up that unit. He also gained a lot of experience in his time as a colonial officer. But as the French and Indian War ended, or the 7 Years' War ended, obviously, everything was scaled back, and he wasn't really needed and everything like that. So in the interwar period, um, Washington was actually, or from before that and after that, Washington was actually a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, which is the like state legislature. During his time as a member of the House of Burgesses, he was, along with all the people in Virginia at the time, a lot of members of the House of Burgesses. He was angered at the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which forbade the colonies from settling past, like west of the Allegheny Mountains. And that stemmed from the conflict with the natives. The British didn't want the colonies to encroach on that and spark a bigger conflict because they had just gone through the war with them and the French. He was also angered with the Stamp Act of 1765. He led protests against the Townshend Acts, which was like a collection of like five or six um, laws that the British passed. Like in addition to the Stamp Act, it was those kind of laws that where they tried to kind of recoup the cost of the 7 Years' War. And in 1769, he actually put forth a proposal in the House of Burgesses that the colonies boycott British goods. And I think last time we mentioned that his brothers were, um, they did the, or maybe it wasn't his brothers. I'm checking.
What about his brothers? You thinking?
Oh no, it was something. I thought it was his brothers that did this, but no, it was him that did this. Because they signed like some kind of like resolutions thing,
Well,
and
they
I
signed the
thought
Stamp Act, didn't they? Didn't Charles
no,
sign?
they signed something that was like against it in like 1760 something, but this was later on.
Oh, okay.
So in 1774, he was a signatory of the Fairfax Resolves, which summarized Virginia's issues with taxation, representation, um, like the taxation by Parliament for to recoup the cost of the 7 Years' War, the colony's lack of representation within Parliament,
Hmm.
the judicial power, which was essentially just in favor of like they could be appointed by the colonial governor, and the I think they were trying to want it. I think they wanted it to be. They were arguing for some kind of electoral system. Um, for just they're also their issue is like military matters and the colonial economy, and they called for a boycott on British goods, and they called for a colonial convention to ensure the colonists' rights as Englishmen, and they actually condemned and called for an end to the Atlantic slave trade. Um,
The Virginia's House legislature.
yeah,
That's pretty
they
interesting.
like actually did that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I didn't know that.
Um, so on August 1st, they called for a colonial convention of all the different colonies getting together and conversing. And that did happen on August 1st, 1774. He attended the first Virginia Convention, where he was elected as a delegate to the First Continental Congress. In the latter half of 1774, he traveled around Virginia and assisted in the training of militia as tensions between the colonies and Britain worsened. So we're not at the jumping off point yet, but tensions are rising, and they're kind of saying, "Hey, just in case something pops off, let's get the militia a little bit more disciplined and a little bit more trained." So he's in the latter half of 1774. He's traveling around Virginia and assisting, kind of getting the local militias a little bit more trained up and disciplined. And then we're just going to kind of jump ahead to um, the beginning of the war with battles of Lexington and Concord. And so that same year, 1775, Washington traveled to Philadelphia and was in the Second Continental Congress in May of 1775. During the Second Continental Congress, Congress created the Continental Army on June 14th, 1775. John Adams, which is the second president after George Washington later on, nominated George Washington for the role of commander-in-chief. Congress approved that unanimously the next day.
And this goes back to what we were saying in the last episode about how when he showed up to the Continental Congress, he was already wearing his military uniform.
Yeah.
So I think that really set the precedence for like when they're looking for a person to be a strong kind of leader, and they're within the Continental Congress. Obviously people aren't agreeing on things; they're debating, and out of this whole crowd, they see one guy, in his military uniform amongst their midst, and at this point, everyone kind of knows who he is. So I think it's more of like a political play. What I would assume is like he knew that if he showed up wearing his uniform, it would get him like maybe some notoriety, or he'd be kind of.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because you got to remember too that see, a lot of people forget that, like, at this point, the most of the people in the colonies are like, okay, let's calm down, let's petition to the king.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, a lot of these
And
early Congresses.
Yeah.
A lot of these early Congresses wanted to stay loyal to the king. So what they found was their issue was with the British Parliament and not with the king. So they wanted to rally the king to actually get behind them. So they kept sending letters off to King George saying like, "Hey, these are our grievances with Parliament and in the UK. Like, can you back us? Can you back us? Can you back us?" And there's actually a couple people, I can't name off the top of my head, but they actually withdrew after the Congresses because they were more loyalists than they were for the Revolution. But initially, a lot of people still wanted to, not separate right away. They wanted to actually stay under the British system, just appealing to the king that, their issue was with Parliament.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it like, so a significant portion, if not a majority of the people in the colonies just at the time, or they're wanting to, like, okay, let's just calm down, wait and see what the king says, and they're going to petition the king and all that. Yeah. And then Washington, it's early on, and Washington is showing up in a military uniform saying, no, let's fight. If we're not going to have to, they're not going to give us our rights as Englishmen, so we have to get them ourselves. We have to ensure our rights ourselves, essentially, is what he's saying by showing up. And he's saying, like, I'm ready for war. And that's insane. Like, to be like so early in that conflict, and it's like the British Empire, it's the most powerful empire in the world at the time. And he's saying, I'm ready to go to war with them right fucking now. Like, from day one. Like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just I don't know. Yeah, it's just a striking thing to think of. Is just him in his uniform, just
sitting there. Yeah, yeah, fucking sitting there. And so his first action. So I wanted to mention too, like, he declined to take a salary. Like, they were going to pay him, and then he was like, "No, it's fine." I mean, he was rich, but I think that was cool.
I'm just trying to look up something right now from. Okay, so this is actually a quote from one of my favorite books. So it's from the Starship Troopers book, not the movie from the 90s, but the actual book, right? So the author says, when you vote, you're exercising political authority, you're using force, and force, my friends, is violence. This is supreme authority from which all other authorities are derived. So I think him showing up in his uniform, him, being a smart man, knowing the political situation, being a military man, he's kind of showing that, like, hey, this is the supreme authority that we need to use to be able
Right.
to get our, our what we need done, our rights. Like, he's setting almost like a precedence.
Yeah, like and like like he's got that's another thing too that not everyone like thinks about too is like he has experience as a politician. Like I said, he was in the House
Yeah.
of Burgesses for like he's 17 years, like almost
Yeah.
2 decades. He was a politician for like 20 years almost.
Yeah.
And he was also a military officer, and he was one of like the fucking elite, in the colonies at least. So like he knows how conservative British politicians and army officers and gentlemen are. So he knows that those guys in Parliament, those conservatives in Parliament, aren't going to give shit to the colonies. They're not going to do
No.
anything unless they're made to, and he
Yeah.
knows what it's going to take. When it's ultimately like force, like you were saying.
I think that kind of goes into a one of his like key leadership qualities that I want to bring up is like he's a visionary, right? So he possesses a clear vision of the future for America, and he knows how he could play a role in like the foundational principles, and he understands the importance of it. So like kind of what you're saying is like he has like more of a strategic, like long-term kind of look. He's a strategic thinker. He always adapts to situations. He's making decisions that are crucial to the success of the revolution, especially in the early days. So like he's thinking long term at this point.
Yeah, and this is kind of the image you see of Washington, or like people like that write about is Washington is very he's always thinking like
Yeah,
what do like not like what do I need to do next, like what do I need to do, like not what is the enemy going to do. He's the one thinking of like, well, the smart thing to do would be this, but he might do this, and if he does this, then I'll have to do this, and
he's
if he
playing
does
like
yeah,
chess in his head almost.
yeah, like, and he's just like constantly contemplating, and a couple times it doesn't work out. He does the wrong thing, and he messes up and like loses early on, but he sticks with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And like to that point, his first act as the commander in chief of the Continental Army was to take command of the siege of Boston on June 22nd, 1775. I made a little list of here of his general staff just because I thought it was like interesting. Um, so his general staff was Major General Artemus Ward, Major General Charles Lee, Major General Philip Schuyler, Major General Nathaniel Greene, Adjutant General Horatio Gates, Colonel Henry Knox was his chief of artillery, and his aide de camp was actually Alexander Hamilton, who would also become president one day.
Hamilton didn't become president.
Did he not?
No,
Yo,
no, he had a big. He
go
was
for
the
it.
first person to have the first sex scandal in American politics that ruined any political career that he had. He was like
Oh, that's
the
right. He was a founding father. My bad.
yeah,
Jesus
the
Christ.
founding father. Yeah, yeah, and
Oh yeah, he was
wow,
the Secretary of the Treasury. That's right.
yeah, he became Secretary of
That's
Treasury.
right.
He's the one that set up the financial institution, and then
That's
he had
right.
a big scandal, and then his whole career was ruined. And then he got in
That's
a
right.
duel with what's his name? Got in a duel with someone, and he died in it.
God, you love that fucking play, don't
Dude, Hamilton, dude, that
you?
play, dude, during COVID when I was sitting at home doing nothing, I watched that play and I listened to that sound. I still listen to that soundtrack every couple weeks. It's so good. I want to go
Jesus
see
Christ.
it.
Um, right. All right. So at the siege of Boston, the British, so the like the militia just like surrounded fucking Boston, and the British like withdrew like into Boston because the surrounding area was like real was like super against the British. So, and like they every time they would like go out into the area around Boston, they would just get like hit with militia, and so they just withdrew into Boston, which by this time was heavily fortified.
Yeah, was it like the main part of Boston almost like its own little peninsula sticking out into the harbor area? At that point, like it wasn't as built up, obviously it is now, and they had them pretty much trapped on this little island.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so the militia, from what I understand, is they pretty much like blockaded them onto the kind of Boston proper area, and then eventually all this fighting on these hills are kind of around
Yeah,
the area. And I know at one point they actually tried to cross the water towards Charlestown, I think it was, or somewhere around there. They tried to fight, but essentially they have them like it's a proper siege. The British are surrounded in Boston, and the militia is there.
they cannot do shit. They
Yeah,
yeah. Um, so Washington arrived there. So he went from Philadelphia to Boston. He arrived in Boston. Has been surrounded and laid siege to the city, but they couldn't attack because they didn't have any. They didn't have any artillery. They didn't have any heavy weaponry to, soften the defenses up. So Henry Knox, his chief of artillery, proposed obtaining heavy weaponry from Fort Ticonderoga. So uh, Knox departed Washington's camp at Cambridge, Massachusetts on November 17th, which is actually coming up. It's cool as fuck.
oh, okay.
November 17th, 1775, and arrived back in Cambridge January 27th, 1776. So, like, 2 months later, almost like 3 months later, almost, uh, with 59 pieces of artillery, which was like cannons, mortars, howitzer type. It ranged in size from 4 to 24 pounders, and it was 119,000 pounds, or about 60 tons. And all of this was transported on sleds through the snow, pulled by oxen.
Damn.
That's fucking insane.
Yeah.
And like this is another common thing that you'll see about like is usually at the time it's winter. An army isn't doing shit.
Yeah, it's
They're in
usually
camp. They're not fighting. They're not doing anything. You'll see like sieges and stuff happen because the the supply line's slow. The besieging army is having their supplies run low and run slower because of the supply chains run thinner, and the besieging city inside is they're not going to leave to fight in the winter. So back then in the winter everything slowed. So
yeah,
it was generally agreed that the armies went into their camp and like we'll resume fighting in the spring when the thaw happens. And
it's really typical for like throughout human history, right? That like winter is like the rest season for war, you know.
yeah, most
It,
definitely.
kind of if we just kind of go back a little bit, I'm going a bit of a tangent, like the Roman like republic back in the day, it was citizen soldiers, right? The fighting season was like, so you would plant your crops, you'd go off for the fighting season, fight a couple skirmishes here and there within the Italian boot, right? When it was Rome was super small, you go back home, do the harvest, stay home for winter, that kind of thing. So like there's a short fighting season you're working around farming and like the weather. And eventually that evolved into like most militaries, right? It's winter, we're not doing anything. Like we're just gonna
Yeah,
take it easy. You know, that's usually when disease starts to spread, people are getting sick. Like you're not really fit to fight also in the winter.
yeah, and you also actually see that when in the Revolutionary War actually, and even in the Civil War, the American Civil War, when they go to recruit people, they will recruit them. They're still recruiting in terms of what traditionally the Romans would do is like for a campaign,
Yeah.
and so it'll be like the Revolutionary War and the American Civil War. You'll still see like in the beginning at least where it's like, oh, you're enlisting like only for 6 months or
Yeah. 1 year.
9 months
Yeah.
or a
Well,
year.
that
Yeah,
that actually becomes a problem later when Washington
yeah,
goes across the
yeah, because
Delaware.
people are leaving.
Well, yeah, everyone's leaving because their enlistments are almost up, and he has to plead with them like one more push, guys. Like if you sign to stay on, you'll get a bonus, and like we have to cross the Delaware. But like we can talk about that later. But it's just like yeah, the these guys enlistments are just like yeah 6 months. Like a lot of these militia guys too during the siege of Boston when things start getting boring, most units are going home. They're like, hey,
Yeah,
like I gotta go
militia's like,
harvest the crops. I gotta go
yeah,
back to my family. Like
yeah,
they're under no obligation. Like the actual
yeah,
military is, when it starts getting all wrapped up and everything, those guys actually enlist and they're, enlisted, so they have a legal contract to be there. But these militia guys are like,
yeah.
dude,
They
I gotta go
volunteer.
home. Dude, I gotta tend to the farm. Like I left the old lady at home, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're like volunteering, like what you can when you can,
Yeah,
and it's until you don't want to or until you can't. So,
yeah,
um, so Knox, so Knox gets back to Cambridge in January of 1776, late January 1776. Uh, this is one of the times where Washington kind of is like, you can see he's like kind of nervous and he like wants to like, no, let's fucking just go in there and get this shit done.
yeah.
So the Charles River freezes over, and Washington wants to storm the city, but most of his force is militia. So he's proposing that Washington is proposing that militia charge across the Charles River, the frozen Charles River, to attack a heavily fortified settlement. And his generals are like, "Ease up, dude. There's no fucking way."
So like my
Um,
my question is like he has all his experience and like, wisdom military wise, and then he says something like this. So is this either
well, no, that's
him
the
being
thing.
naive
Like,
or is it just him being default aggressive?
I think it's him. Like,
Trying to seize the initiative
I
and be
think he's
aggressive?
yeah, I think he's being like that's the thing though. Like by this point, like in the beginning of the war, dude, like I know there's like this mystique around Washington. Like in the early part of the war, like he's like kind of getting his ass kicked.
Oh
Like
yeah, yeah, I
he
understand that.
loses quite a bit, and he
Yeah.
doesn't really like he's there's talk of, and again we'll mention this
Replacing
later.
him.
There's
Yeah.
talk of like replacing him and shit. It causes a big issue. Like it's a
Yeah.
big drama thing later on, but and we'll get to that. But so in this early thing, I think what he's trying to do is I think he's trying to kind of prove early on that he's like, no, like I want to kick the shit out. I want to hurry up and beat him. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And he's thinking like, I mean, yeah, you would think that like that, like attacking across a frozen river is something the British are fucking 100% not going to expect.
Well,
But
the kind of funny thing is, there's an instance in Canadian history where the Quebec Patriots are trying to do their own little revolution up in Papineauville, Quebec, and the British regulars march across the frozen river and just like decimate the French like
right,
revolutionary rebels, just slaughter them. So it's like you guys did this. I think it was before no, it was after the revolution. Yeah. So it's like it is possible, but
right. Well, just the only thing is that most of like them are militia. So while
yeah,
you do have the element of surprise, when it gets down into like the fighting in the street,
hmm
the British are going to line up in their rank and file and fire down the fucking street. The militia's not going to do that.
yeah,
The militia's going to go around ransacking, lighting shit on fire. They're not going to be. They're essentially just going to like sack the city.
yeah.
That's what it would get down to. And like, like thank God Washington like actually listens to his generals because they're all like,
Well,
let's not like
Well,
let's
yeah, it's kind of a big issue, like especially going. I know I'm jumping around a lot, but like my favorite military man of all time, the Duke of Wellington, his troops were highly disciplined in battle. But when it came to like sieges after they took a city, those guys were like wild animals, just
yeah,
stealing, burning, raping.
raping,
So
yeah,
so so it's like I understand Washington's hesitation at this point from like hindsight throughout history, but like yeah, sieges are really difficult things.
yeah,
Not just because you actually have to get in the city, but once you're in the city, you lose all command and control of your men.
yeah, absolutely. And so like his general staff is they're not wanting to do this. They think it's a bad idea. So Washington said, okay, well let's use the cannons we just got. So he had his men fortify Dorchester Heights with the cannons that Knox brought him from Fort Ticonderoga. And the if you look up a picture of it, like Dorchester Heights, if anyone looks
Yeah.
up a picture of Dorchester Heights, it's literally a hill that overlooks Boston. It's the perfect place to set cannons and shit if you want to fire down into the city. And that's exactly what they do. They just fire down into the city on the encamped British and Loyalist forces. And the British, they after this happens, they're like, we can't stay here because it's winter and we're fucking surrounded, and they have cannon that can directly fire down onto us. So the British just withdrew from Boston on March 17th of 1776, and the colonial forces occupied the city. So in his first action, yes, technically a win, you know, but like like it was good. Like it was good that he won. I mean, it showed, oh damn, okay, we got it. But like, if they had done what Washington wanted to do, maybe it would have happened differently. I mean,
Yeah, well, see, that's a important thing is like when you're in leadership position, like you actually want to like surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, that know more than you, that are subject matter experts on things that you're not. So I think it's a valuable thing where like he may have had this idea, but in the end, he also kind of listened to
yeah,
the people under him,
yeah,
and that's a really important thing within like being a good leader
yeah.
is
It's the ability to listen to your underlings for your advisors. It's to take into account the people who are supposed to advise you on stuff like that.
that's almost like humility is like he understands where he himself has flaws and where he was wrong, and to
Yeah,
kind of put his ego aside, detach from the scenario and listen what they're saying. It's just a great thing to do. And like I think that's kind of something that he does throughout his kind of career a lot, like politically and militarily, is he knows when it's time to like, hey, stop, take a step back, detach from your ego, and kind of see the strategic picture.
yeah, most definitely. Um, so continuing on, so the British withdrew and they actually went to Halifax.
I love Halifax. It's such a
Um,
beautiful city.
so they, uh, William Howe was the commander.
Yeah.
And he withdrew his forces from Boston. They went to Halifax. And Washington, fearing that the British would seek to occupy the city of New York, Washington took his men. They went to Manhattan, and he arrived in mid-April of 1776. And General Howe from Halifax Harbor launched a invasion force from Halifax Harbor, and they landed at Long Island on. So this is heading into the New York and New Jersey campaign.
Yeah.
So General Howe set out from Halifax Harbor and landed at Long Island or on Long Island on July 2nd, 1776, with 10,000 men and another 15,000 on the way. Washington found this out, obviously, and not having enough information about the forces, he split up his army. So at this point, the Continental Army had about 19,000, and he split them up in fortified positions on Long Island, Manhattan, mainland New York, and he set up a flying company in northern New Jersey, which was meant to assist in operations in New Jersey, just kind of be a rapid response force in New Jersey if
Yeah.
the British kind of tried anything. Um, so as part of the New York and New Jersey campaign, there's a couple little battles I want to mention here. So there was the Battle of Long Island. So when the Howe's 15,000 reinforcements, so Howe's got 25,000 men here now. He attacked August 26, 1776. The Battle of Long Island occurs. Washington's forces are surprised and briefly routed, resulting in a lot of casualties. This is a cool story. This little thing here. A contingent of men from the First Maryland Regiment. Um, they were later known as the Maryland 400. Remained to hold off the British contingent of 2,000 men and two cannons. So they had to cross this little like creek thing,
Yeah.
and there was like a house near the creek, and these Marylanders they just hold up in this like house thing, I guess. And so it was like 400 against like 2,000 men, like with artillery. and 256 Marylanders died, and most of the rest were captured. And less than a dozen of them made it back to the Continental lines. Washington watched the engagement from a nearby hilltop and is reported to have said, "Good God, what brave fellows I must this day lose." So I
Like,
just thought that was
that's
insane.
it. I haven't heard that before, and that kind of shows that like so early in the war, where everything is fresh, like the resolution of men to like stand and fight and die like for what they believe in, fighting, for their brothers, for what they're believing they're doing is right, their just cause. And like I said, so early on in the war, before things are really flushed out, these men have like the determination to like hold the line, and that's what's really commendable.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, just these 400 guys are like hold off against like a contingent of guys like 4 or 5 times their size. It's like, Jesus. Um, so his men having retreated to Brooklyn Heights, and him seeing no way out, Washington ordered his forces to withdraw because they don't want to get trapped on, they don't want to get trapped on the island. So,
Yeah.
um, Washington ordered his forces to withdraw on the night of August 29th. This is fucking insane. He ordered all of it, the entire army, to withdraw from Brooklyn Heights.
Yeah.
All 9,000 men were evacuated without a single loss of life in a single night. That's
Damn.
like insane.
That's like a logistical like
Miracle. Like
miracle.
fuck, dude. Like no one got hurt.
So,
No,
so
no like,
there's a common theme throughout Washington's kind of military career that I've heard a lot of people discuss is like luck. So
yeah, it
I want to
seems like
ask you
it.
is that luck or is that divine intervention from God?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's a lot of it is either or. Like you can honestly say either. I mean, like the British commanders honestly were just really, really too conservative. Pretty much all of them were. They're just very weary about going out and attacking, as where Washington is like his generals have to talk him down from attacking so much. And you'll see like time
I
and
just think
again.
that like it's not just a one-off event where oh man, wow, we just made it,
No,
guys.
it's
Like good
not.
job. It's
Yeah.
like a consistent theme throughout his military career in the Revolution is like luck after luck after luck after luck. I don't know, man. That sounds
I think it's just a combination of just the conservativeness of the British commanders in battle. They don't want to get caught out. They don't want to get, they want to fucking lose. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
all their fucking honor and all this shit is like riding on them, not fucking up. And you'll see like the couple times like where they do like kind of go all in, and then Washington was like a step ahead of them, and then they're like, oh shit,
yeah.
But so I think like all of the above, you know what I mean? Like, I mean that's the only way it could have happened like that. Like, um, so yeah, like August 29th, all 9,000 are evacuated without a single loss of life. Like a week later, on September 7th, 1776, this is cool. Washington ordered the Turtle, which was a submarine, to attempt to sink the HMS Eagle, which is Howe's flagship moored off of Governor's Island in New York Harbor.
Yeah.
The attack failed, but it was the first instance in which a submarine was used in warfare, and George Washington ordered its use to happen like that. I thought that
That's
was
cool.
cool shit that George Washington in 1776 ordered the first submarine to be used in warfare to try and um, destroy the flagship. It's actually crazy what it would have done. What the Turtle would have done is it would have like the idea was that they drilled a hole into the hull of the ship, and then they would attach a mine to it. So if that would have succeeded, the HMS Eagle would have just been obliterated,
Yeah.
and like how like hundreds of men would have just died.
And they would have had no idea.
That's fucking insane. Yeah, they would have been like, oh, oh, it was a powder explosion or some shit like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember hearing like a more in-depth story about this, and there's a lot that kind of goes on
There's
with
so
like,
much that goes
yeah,
on with the research and this being like used and that kind of thing. It's a
yeah.
really cool story. But continue on the Battle of Harlem Heights and the Battle of White Plains. I feel like skimming over these. These are kind of smaller little battles, but I feel like they should be mentioned in this. Washington retreats before being defeated in the Battle of Harlem Heights. So there's a little skirmish, and Washington sees like, oh damn, they're trying to get around him. He retreats, which that's another good thing is like people are like, oh, Washington loses a lot in the beginning. But it's like yes, technically he's losing the field, but really what he's doing is he's withdrawing so that he's not losing. You know what I mean? Like
Well,
he's withdrawing so he doesn't fucking die and lose all his men. Like he's living to fight
thing,
another day essentially.
I'm saying he's a very strategic thinker, where it's like, do I really want to sacrifice my men for, a tactical stalemate or like maybe a possible victory where like you could win every battle and still lose the war, or in his case, you can kind of lose battles but still win the war. He's thinking like strategic,
Right.
and like
Yeah.
I think we've talked about this before on the show where it's sometimes better to pull back out of a situation to kind of reorientate yourself and reassess what you're doing and pick a stronger position to fight on.
Yeah. And I think he's really good at that.
Yeah, like we just said before, he's really good at kind of like stopping, taking a step back and analyzing the whole situation. And if it's not a good place to fight, why bother engaging? Just pull back.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you were saying before about like the humility of being able to like kind of step outside and view yourself in the situation from outside of, yourself really.
Yeah, yeah,
And
it's
and yeah. Um so with the Battle of Harlem Heights and White Plains, Washington retreats. Before being defeated, the Continental forces withdrew into Pennsylvania across the Delaware River in early December 1776. Now we get to the Battle of Trenton. This is the big kind of almost like turning point, I think.
is this where he crosses the Dell?
Yeah. Spoiler alert, dudes. Jesus.
Oh, sorry, man. I mean,
Hmm.
I just think of like the iconic
Yeah,
him
the picture.
crossing in the picture, and there's
Yeah.
another thing that I don't know if we're at that point yet. Like I said, I'm not super familiar with the American Revolution, but I got a point to discuss when it comes to the crossing and fighting the Hessians.
Yeah, we're getting to it. Yeah, it's right. Yeah, I'm about to talk about it.
Okay.
So on night of December 25th, 26th. So that's again too. It's fucking Christmas, dog.
Yeah.
the the so like the it's Trenton, New Jersey. So the Hessians, which if anyone doesn't know, like the
That's
Hessians
what
are
that's
like
what I want. That's what I want to talk
yeah,
about. Is so the king of England.
yeah,
So he's in control of Hesse, or it's a German kind of city state.
yeah,
Because at this
the
point,
province.
Germany isn't,
Yeah,
it isn't really unified. Anyways,
yeah, it's not.
so something is he, since he was essentially the king or prince of that area, he had access to the Hessian troops. Now, bringing in foreign mercenaries was a common thing throughout kind of Europe, because people would have at this point kind of professional small armies, and mercenaries were kind of a way to subsidize the forces they already had. But what really pissed off the Americans was the fact that they sought this as a war between Englishmen, essentially thinking themselves as the English and the
Yeah,
British as the English, and they were kind of upset and angry that the king would use foreign troops on American soil to fight against their own countrymen, and that really pissed off the Americans. Were like, wow, like why are you using foreign troops on us?
they're like,
We're your
yeah,
brother Englishmen. It was kind of
yeah,
a little bit of an ordeal, and that's kind of what I wanted to bring
yeah,
up with the Hessians.
yeah. It's like the colonists are like, damn, so you're treating us like you treat the French, huh? Wow.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. They're like, wow. Okay. All right. Um. So yeah, like December 25th, 26th. So it's Christmas, dude. Like the Hessians. It's winter. Everyone's chilling. They're in camp. They're not doing nothing. They're not fighting. They're not ready. So the Hessians are chilling in Trenton, New Jersey. They've got 1,500 Hessians are encamped within Trenton under Colonel Johann Rahl. Washington crosses the Delaware at night, and yeah, that's where the famous portrait of him crossing the Delaware comes up. And so he crosses the Delaware, and again under the cover of night catches the 1,500 Hessians completely off guard, and nearly 1,000 Hessians were killed or captured. And so, yeah, nearly 1,000 Hessian of the 1,500 Hessians in Trenton, nearly 1,000 were killed or captured, which is massive. So Washington, they captured Trenton. So that's December 25th, 26th. The second Battle of Trenton on January 2nd, 1777 now. This is where Cornwallis comes in. It's early on where Cornwallis is. Cornwallis left New York to engage Washington south of Trenton, just south of Trenton. His attack was slowed by a, like, I guess, company or something of riflemen. So it's just kind of imagine like the British troops like marching down the, just the country roads, and like there's like this like company of like just riflemen who can like are really accurate. They can just like taking pot shots at them. Like they'll have to like fuck, like stop every once in a while and just get like hit and shit.
That's a good delaying action.
Yeah, and it does. It slows them significant. And Washington is, because of that, they're slowed enough that Washington is actually able to intercept the British at a crossing over the Assunpink Creek. The British tried 3 times to cross this bridge. At first, they were beaten back by musket fire. Then they were beaten back by cannon fire, like the just round shot. And then they were beaten back by canister shot. Which is like the shotgun one.
So they were just kind of peppering them.
Yeah, they were fucking. The British were trying to like bunker hill it and just keep going, dude. Like the old Soviet war tactic of throwing bodies at it. But no, they were beat back, and so after that, the next day, Battle of Princeton. So it's like quick succession. You know what I mean? It's like 26th, they take Trenton. 2nd, they're fighting Cornwallis, and then the Princeton, January 3rd, 1777. So the next day, Washington actually outflanks Cornwallis and also attacks the British forces at Princeton, New Jersey. And it attacked Princeton, and a quarter of the 5,000 men Cornwallis brought with him are lost in between that December 25th and January 3rd. So Cornwallis, from New York City, brings 5,000 men with him into New Jersey. And from December 25th to January 3rd, like in that, little over a week, he loses about a quarter. I think like 1,500 of his 5,000 men that he brought, which is such significant. Washington's performance also receives international notice at this. This was cool. I found this. Frederick the Great, one of the the greatest military minds ever, right? Yeah. He wrote that the achievement. This is a quote. Quote the achievements of Washington at Trenton and Princeton were the most brilliant of any recorded in the history of military achievements. End quote. Like Frederick the Great said that.
It's a pretty high statement or honor for him. Yeah.
Damn.
So
the French foreign minister, a strong supporter of the American cause, also renewed the delivery of French supplies because they'd already started receiving French aid, and the French had stopped aid because it looked like the colonists were going to lose.
Yeah, they didn't want to get too much
Yeah, they
into.
didn't want to commit too much. So that now with this kind of big blow, the French are like, okay, we'll start sending stuff again. Then after this is the leading into the Philadelphia campaign. So at the time, just common thing was like if you capture a nation's capital, it's automatic victory. There's nothing you can do. They're not going to set up their capital in someplace else. They're going to capitulate. And the
It's
British
a
are
pretty
actually
silly concept looking
right.
back
Yeah.
on it, but
Yeah. But the British capture Philadelphia, actually. The Continental Congress flees, because the British have all said, you're going to be tried and hanged for treason.
yeah,
And so they flee, and they actually capture the city of Philadelphia. And the British are very surprised when the colonies don't give up, because all of the colonies essentially said, yes, we are united against we're united against Britain, but there's 13 capitals, So, um, so the British were like kind of taken aback by like, oh, we took their capital, oh, and they didn't surrender. Okay. So after this, the Battle of Saratoga, Washington doesn't as much take a front seat in this. This is more so Horatio Gates, but I wanted to mention this as the big point, big turning point.
yeah.
Because also Horatio Gates is still under Washington's command. So John Burgoyne is now in charge of. So Howe kind of flubbed everything, and he's removed after the Trenton debacle. So they put John Burgoyne in, and Burgoyne was defeated by Horatio Gates at Saratoga. The Continental Army was 25,000 strong. The British Army was 13,000 strong. Burgoyne lost 1,000 of his 8,500 men that were under his direct command. He lost 1,000 of them, which again for that time was insane. That's a ton. Burgoyne gave Gates his. This is a couple little facts that I thought was cool about this. Burgoyne gave Horatio Gates his sword, but Horatio Gates returned it, like as a respect thing.
Yeah.
As the British forces marched out of Saratoga, the Continental Army played Yankee Doodle, and the British played the British Grenadiers. So just like imagine, I'm just like imagining that of like the prim and proper way of like the Continentals kind of being maybe a little bit less professional, kind of getting ready to throw a fucking party because they just won, and like the British like just stoically marching out, listening, playing the Grenadiers, you know. Um, of note though, Gates delegated to his subordinates. Gates was actually he was like, y'all figure it out, and his subordinates won the battle, but he took the credit for it. And then to that point, there's a this will make sense later on. So he takes credit of Saratoga, which is the most significant victory at that point, and that this it'll come up later as why it's important that Gates is taking credit for that. And now we're getting to Valley Forge, though. Did you say you had something to mention about Valley Forge?
Yeah, I had something to kind of.
Or did you want to tack it on at the end of it?
Well, it was more. It was more on like a certain incident in history that is kind of debated or whatever. I don't know if you go through Valley Forge and let me know when you want me to kick in.
All right, cool. So Valley Forge is again it's winter. Everyone's camping out. Washington actually does camp out. He chills out for pretty much one of the only times. It's for like 6 months. They're camped out at Valley Forge, and So he's got 11,000 men under him, under his direct command at this point in Valley Forge. 11,000 men, and 3,000 of them die over the winter from like disease and shit like that. Which again is like an insane amount of people. Valley Forge was like it crazy bad. Like it was very, very bad. Like a ton of people were sick. It was just terrible experience. It was cold. There's no food, you know. Um, so this was everything. All of this, this kind of all this mess at Valley Forge was exacerbated by like a combination of like poor management by the quartermasters and like the preference of like local farmers to continue to sell to the British because the British were paying in pound sterling and the Continentals were offering like continental dollars at this point, which is like worth nothing. Um, and the British are paying like pound sterling still. So, and you know, it's the British pound, so there's nothing more valuable than that in the world at the time. So it's like, oh, worthless like money or the British pound. You know, so they're doing with the British, and this is kind of a interesting point here. Congress actually authorized Washington to start seizing goods from the people, but Washington was reluctant to because he thought it was the same type of tyranny they were there fighting against. And so I thought that was interesting. It kind of shows, you know, like he has like standards, like morals. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean he's a man of his convictions, and he's gonna stand up and speak out against injustices and kind of say what he believes in, and that's kind of like a admirable quality once again, you know, as him as a leader is he has integrity. Like he has an unwavering commitment to honesty, integrity, and moral principles. You know, he has a strong sense of ethics, and he has like he sets the standard for others to follow. And that's like I said, great leadership qualities. Like the thing I love about history is we have all these great leaders. He was a man who kind of lived by what he preached. So he was a strong leader, and everyone knew it because the things that he stood up for is the way he lived his life.
Yeah, and it showed in his, you know, like you're saying, military conduct and all that kind of stuff. Like this situation here,
Yeah.
and so during the winter, the army was actually retrained. They're like kind of like you know drilled and stuff by Baron von Steuben.
He
He
wasn't
was
a
a, like
real baron.
yeah, he made it up.
Yeah, he
Uh,
made it all up,
he
but
was
he
a
had
Prussian
experience.
officer. Yeah, he did. He was an officer in the Prussian like military, but he made the like nobility thing up.
Yeah, didn't he? Wasn't he? Didn't he serve under? Was it Frederick the Great or something during
I
his
think so.
campaigns? And
Yeah.
he kind of lied a bit his way into it. But the thing is, fake it till you make it, you know. And he made
Oh
it.
yeah. Oh yeah. And it's like Harold, like just like especially back then, like how the fuck are they gonna check? You know, like
Well, I mean, yeah, you're not gonna.
it's gonna take yeah. Even if they wanted to check, like why for one, why wouldn't if he shows up wearing like a Prussian officer's uniform, why are you just not gonna believe him? Like with a German accent, you're
Well,
like yeah. Like back then, people were just like okay,
well, a huge issue they had was they had a foreign American agent. I believe it was Silas Dean. I'm not sure, but essentially the Congress sent a representative to the court in France, and he was handing out commissions as officers in the American Continental Army. So
God,
at this time, it was kind of like an acceptable thing for if let's say you're a serving officer of the French military and there's nothing going on, and let's say you're a lieutenant. Well, if there's a war going on in another country, I could take my leave and be commissioned the next rank up in a foreign military. So you can get a commission as a captain or even a major, and gain battlefield experience. And the French government would let you because they want you to get experience. And
yeah,
you, being a man of action, would want to kind of go off. So the American agent in France was handing out these commissions, like just like to any French officer, Prussian officer, anyone who said they had experience. He just handed these things out, and a lot of times these guys would come into America by the droves and be like, "Hey, I have this commission," and the Continental Congress would be like, "We didn't authorize this." we didn't authorize this. And they actually accepted some people. There was a brigadier general, I forget his name, but he was made into it. And this kind of goes back to something I said in the first episode, which is something that I found really interesting is, so there was a bunch of guys that showed up to Continental Congress. One of them was the Marquis de Lafayette, and he was
Yeah.
issued one of these commissions as an officer. Well, he showed up to Congress, and Congress is like, well, I don't know. Like, you're only a lieutenant or a captain at this point, and whatever he commissioned you as. And because he was also a fellow Freemason with Washington, Washington knew that, or they chatted, figured out they were Freemasons. And out of that group of guys that presented up to Congress, it was only the Marquis de Lafayette, the only Freemason who actually got his commission ratified by Congress.
God.
Yeah, so
All about who you know, dude.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. The
But
Freemasonry thing, I brought it up earlier, and I just think it's a really interesting thread because I'm a huge fan of the Marquis de Lafayette, or the Citizen Lafayette as he's called later. So
yeah. So and so that so yeah. So during Valley Forge and during the winter, the army is like drilled by Baron von Steuben. Um, due to the but during this time, so the army's getting a little bit better. So they're drilling, they are practicing. You know what I mean? But because of the loss of Philadelphia, some members of Congress have actually kind of like started murmurs of like, I don't think Washington's doing it. I think he needs to be replaced. I think Horatio Gates needs to replace him. And this led to what was called the Conway Cabal, in which Brigadier General Thomas Conway sent letters critiquing Washington to, I guess, friends or acquaintances in the Continental Congress. And they found their way to Congress, and they were read aloud in Congress. And because of this, Conway resigns. And so it was letters between Conway and Gates, and Conway and this other, or no, I'm sorry, Conway. It was letters between Conway and this, I think this congressman. And he was kind of praising Gates and saying Gates would do a much better job and like all this kind of stuff.
yeah,
And like Gates was like, "Oh, I would be interested," and you know what I mean. And so Conway resigned, and Gates offered an official apology for his role in the matter.
yeah,
But that is as close as Washington ever got to being replaced. So not very at all. But that's where it was going to like Saratoga. That's where I was talking about earlier. Is that kind of like it comes up as like, oh, we should let Gates. He's the one that won at Saratoga, not Washington. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But in actuality, like Gates just delegated to his subordinates, and like their own individual actions on the battlefield is what won it, and not his overall strategic command. And so then at this point, with Saratoga and Valley Forge, with Saratoga, that officially convinced the French to like militarily assist the colonies, like in terms of like actual sending military over.
we go
Like,
back to Valley Forge.
like,
There's something I wanted to bring up.
oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. So there's the image we're going to be using for this is obviously, as you'll see because you clicked on the episode, thankfully, thank you for listening, is the image of Washington on his knees praying at Valley Forge. Now, it's kind of disputed because there was a local Quaker, Potts, who saw General Washington, and he kind of found Washington, out praying by himself in the forest on his knees praying. And that was kind of given to a Presbyterian minister named Reverend Nathaniel Snowden, and that was kind of pushed as a myth throughout history. And then, so contrary to the contemporary claims that the American founding fathers were secular in their outlook and the founding of America, George Washington and the other founding fathers were overwhelmingly a majority of Christians in both principle and practice. Okay, so secularists and irreligious people that are attempting to continue to suppress the public Christian expression and the origin of America are doing so against the facts of history. Okay, now if we look into Washington himself as a man, he was known to be praying regularly during the war. According to the testimony of his officers and family members, there's a testimony from his nephew who said at Mount Vernon after the war, he found Washington kneeling beside a chair with an open Bible on top of it all the time. So people aren't sure why this kind of modern what do they call it?
I don't want to say restorative because they're not
No,
restoring, but
it's
like revisionist.
revisionist. Yeah, the modern revisionist narrative that the founding fathers wanted, that were, they weren't secular. It's like, no, the founding fathers were men of God. They preached it and they practiced it, and any kind of revisionist history is bullshit. Okay.
And like going off of that is like the only alternative to like they're like of course it was of course like secularism of like the separation of church and state. It's like at the time like it was a legitimate, it was in the common, it was history, not like 100 years ago. Like there were countries who was like essentially like
Run by the
almost
church.
like theocracies almost, you know what I mean? Or it's
And
like
an important thing that I want to bring up is when people say the freedom of religion in America. That freedom of religion in America is to practice different types of Christianity freely and not be in trouble for it, right? You had the Puritans that came over to America that, they're different from the Anglican Church. You have different Protestant denominations. Let's say the Presbyterians from Scotland that were not really friendly with everyone else, right? They went over to America and they were able to practice Presbyterianism freely. It has nothing to do with like the complete separation of religious values from the establishment of the country. That's just my little tirade that I wanted to go on.
like they didn't see it as a, they didn't see it as a, like it was like a bureaucratic like ease of getting stuff done thing. It wasn't a oh, religion is bad and shouldn't be a part of government. It was like no, like 9 out of 10 of them, like if not all 10, like the entire amount was Christian or like humanist, whatever that. But it's like even like humanists back then are like what we would probably call like agnostic now.
Yeah,
Of like, they believed in like some god. Then they're like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like back then there wasn't really the idea of like, I'm sure there was atheists, but like back then it was more so like you were a humanist. But even then a humanist then was like an agnostic now of like, yes, I believe in a God. I don't attend church or whatever. I,
yeah.
do it in my own way. You know what I mean?
But I'm just bringing up the fact that, irregardless that this situation happened, where someone stumbled across Washington praying in the forest, he was actively doing it throughout the war. So maybe
Yeah.
this certain instance that's from this famous painting happened or not. There's many cases where he would have been doing it, and there's
Yeah.
prime
I mean, I think,
examples
yeah. I mean,
and
yeah, like
of
his,
him doing it.
yeah, like his family, he came from a strong, like, Anglican family. Like we talked about in the first episode, his brother, like, two of his, like, three biological brothers were, um, there was something in the, Anglican church or the local parish,
Yeah, it was a position,
vestrymen, as they
vestryman,
handled
and and
they
and
cared for, like,
Washington
the poor, the
himself was
social
one for
services.
20 years.
Mm.
So
Yeah, like
yes,
he was like he was from a strong Anglican family. They're involved in the local parish. They prayed, that that kind of thing.
it
Like I
says
don't know.
Washington prayed privately and read his Bible every day. He publicly encouraged people and the nation to pray. Like, I don't know where this revisionist history comes from, but I just wanted to say that. I mean, we are,
Modern atheist. It's atheist now.
yeah, it's modern atheist kind of
Anti-religion.
propaganda.
It's anti-religion
Yeah,
people now.
yeah, and that's what it is.
Um.
It's they're trying to push their narrative and rewrite history, and I don't stand for it at all. Right or wrong, we will say what happened, and that's something I think is really important for talk about history.
Yeah, especially like it's like if you don't agree with history, like okay, that's fine, but like you can't say like it didn't happen or like you just lie and say it happened differently because you don't fucking like it.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? What do you? Okay, you don't like that. Okay, like if you're doing that, like you're opening if you do stuff like that, like you're like, oh, history was wrong. It shouldn't be like that. Like you're changing the narrative. Like that's a thin line between, oh, uh, I don't like the fact that the Nazis are blamed for doing bad shit. Like what? Like
yeah,
it's a thin line, dude. Like
yeah,
because if you start saying like, oh, I don't like that. the founding fathers are like celebrated and they were like slave owners and all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, dude, history sucked.
Yeah,
If they were alive now, they'd be like, damn, slavery's shitty. You know what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah.
But they aren't, okay? They were rich dudes when it was common to own people. It fucking happened. It sucks. If you were alive back then, you did it. You know what I mean? Even if you thought it was shitty, usually.
You
Like
can't
Thomas
judge
Jefferson.
history
Yeah.
through modern lenses.
Yeah,
And
it's ridiculous. There's no like you're setting yourself up for failure when you're doing that because like you can try to understand it, but there's just some things you're not going to be able to understand. And that's part of getting into history, which you're going to have to deal with. That's part of the human experience of history is that you with your modern sensibilities are not going to be able to understand every facet of history because you just weren't there. And to look back on it and obviously you can critique it, but to say, oh, that was bad and we shouldn't look at them in a good way because of their bad stuff, you know what I mean? Like, it's insane. So anyway,
yeah,
uh,
well said. I didn't mean
yeah,
for it
like,
to get off that
no,
far,
like,
but
it's irritates me too. Like,
it was just something that I wanted to speak up about. And I mean, as our
yeah,
podcast is also Christian themed, so I want to, kind of state our case.
yeah. Um, so back to, so okay, so the victories at Saratoga opened up where the French were fully on. They're going to provide military assistance and army, navy, so um, because of this, Britain could no longer um, they could no longer claim dominion over the seas because before that, the colonial navy essentially doesn't exist really. It's like a small blockade running fleet or like raiding fleet essentially.
They had like a
It's little
handful
sloops.
of ships, yeah, little tiny ships
Yeah, it's
that
like little sloops and shit.
and they set off a couple of raiding parties to kind of
Yeah,
engage British
like yeah, like
commerce. They
yeah,
went
just like
down to the
harass.
Caribbean and kind of harassed,
Yeah,
and I'm pretty sure they
yeah,
took like an island for a couple days down there. But
I think so too. But
yeah,
they didn't have any like the French came in with like ships of the line.
oh
You know what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
like
real
the little
ships.
sloops had like 18 guns, and the French came with like ships of the line that had like 54 and shit. Like
Yeah,
big difference. So when the French come in, it really kind of cements the kind of like, oh, okay, like you're fucked now. Like there's no way. Like because the colonists are already winning. You know what I mean? Or at the very least, you're not. So,
yeah,
and you're not, and you're fighting a war thousands away from your home. So, like, just get fucked. Like, it was a shitty situation from the beginning, from the British point of view. Like, um, so at this point, oh, and that's the thing too is that at this point, because France entered the war, Britain also had to worry about their other colonies. So it was a legitimate threat that France might try and, you know, attack Canada, or they might
well,
try and attack the Caribbean,
I
or,
think at this point when France enters, the British kind of priority shifts from the battle in America to securing their colonies in the Caribbean. They made a lot more money off the crops being grown in the Caribbean than they did tenfold over from the tobacco in America or trade in America. So their main kind of thought at this point was preserving the
yeah,
money
the
makers they
sugar.
have in the Caribbean.
Yeah, the
And
sugar.
that's where they shifted a lot of their navy was down to the Caribbean, and
Yeah,
that opened it all up for the French to come in and help more.
right. And well, it opened up for the French to help us secure the wind,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
because they shifted the navy down to the Caribbean, and so Cornwallis was now in charge. I was like skipping ahead a little bit.
Well,
Like nothing
he
really
was in
happened. Like
charge in the south because like the war kind of dies
right.
down
It
up
does, yeah.
up in the north, and all the fighting shifts down to the Carolinas, and that's where Cornwallis is sent down to control what's going on down there.
Right, because at that point, like Boston had always been that was always the most fervent colony against Britain, and the loyalist support was actually way stronger down south because it was more the old kind of conservative kind of thing.
Yeah, the landowners.
Yeah, and so it kind of shifts down to where they can get a little bit more local support, the actual loyalist militias that don't get talked about enough. And so the fighting, like you're saying, it shifts down to Virginia and the Carolinas. Um, he so Cornwallis actually went to Yorktown, Virginia, to be evacuated by the Royal Navy. This is coming up on the end of the war here. So he moved his forces to Yorktown to be evacuated by the Royal Navy. Washington, they set a trap by where the French forces in New England and the Continental forces in New York would move rapidly to surround Cornwallis and Yorktown, and they did that. And also, like you were saying, the British fleet shifted south, and they committed too much of their fleet to the Caribbean, and the French fleet defeated the British rescue fleet in the Battle of the Chesapeake. So like just off the coast of like Yorktown and the Chesapeake, and Cornwallis was forced to surrender on October 17th, 1781. The victory led to the pro-war faction in the British Parliament losing political control because they essentially lost the war. Like their point was now moot in the British Parliament, and the British government, which is now anti-war essentially, or anti-war with the colonies essentially, sued for peace, which was ratified in the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Sorry.
I mean,
And that,
I'm
that
just
kind
saying
of wraps it up.
between when we said what was going on up north and then the Battle of Yorktown, there was other stuff going on in the southern colonies, but we just wanted to kind of stick to the sphere of Washington himself and what he was involved with.
Yeah, a lot of what happened down in the South was delegating because Washington delegated his subordinates.
Yeah, because he can't control everything at once. So
Right. And so he knew that the Northeast, what like Massachusetts and Philadelphia, was the key, and he didn't want to obviously don't want to lose Philadelphia again.
yeah,
But yeah, so that rapid move from having the French forces in like New England and the Continental forces in New York kind of rapidly surround Cornwallis at Yorktown, and then the kind of stunning like French fleet. You can just imagine like the siege of Yorktown. They're surrounding Yorktown. They could hear the cannon fire off the coast. You know what I mean? They're just waiting to see. And then after both sides are just wondering like, damn, what's happening? You know what I mean? And then finally you see like French flags off of the horizon. You're like, oh damn. You know what I mean? It's a crazy thing to imagine.
yeah, it's I mean, everything is just insane because it's kind of like unheard of that something would rebel against the British Empire at this point. This is very early on. You know, I'd say it's the beginning of the trouble starting for the empire itself.
Yeah, definitely.
So I
But
think we're gonna wrap it up here, and we'll finish the next
yeah,
episode off the series with talk about his presidency and the later stages of Washington's life. So I just wanted to bring something up right at the end. I wanted to bring up a verse from the Bible that talks about perseverance, right? Because something that George Washington kind of does and is kind of known for is like his perseverance, his ability to no matter what, inspire and rally people behind his cause. And he's very good at being an orator to get people kind of behind him. And I think it just kind of exemplifies everything about the struggles of his life during the war. So it's James 1:12, and it says, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." Now, like I was saying, it's a very important verse about perseverance. It implores us not to give up, even when we face trials. Again, we are reminded of God's promise to stay true to what truly matters. When we embrace God's love amidst a world that continues to deny it, we set ourselves on the right and proper course.
Oh yeah, dude. Amen.
Yeah, amen, brother. So with that, thanks for listening. This might be a little bit of a longer episode than we normally do. I haven't been keeping track of time, but it was a really good
Cool. That's good.
conversation.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
And I just want to thank everyone, like always, who's been tuning and listening. Our numbers have been going up. I've had, people coming up to me in person saying, I really enjoyed this episode. It was a great talk. I really appreciate everyone who's doing that, especially the people that kind of don't know us but are listening anyways online. We've, we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So if you get a chance on Instagram and Facebook, give us a follow. We have a lot of interaction. We've been getting, hundreds of likes on our posts on Facebook. We're getting good traction on Instagram, but we need people to actually click the follow button on both. I've been trying to post daily stories, history related on topic on our Instagram, and that same thing on our Facebook, so check it out. And besides that, Harry, got anything you want to say at the end?
No, just I was looking at the analytics in where our listeners are from, and just seeing where everyone's at is like real cool. Like where our listeners are from. I wanted to pull it up here. It's actually super interesting, I thought. So obviously most of our listeners are from Canada and the United States. We actually got a couple listeners from the United Kingdom, in England, and we got listeners in Australia and Sweden, which I thought was cool. I just wanted to mention that. Like, shout out to
Yeah,
whoever those
shout out to
people were.
whoever you
Like,
are down under and
yeah,
up north there in the Nordic Circle.
yeah,
Thanks for listening.
yeah. I appreciate it, and see you next time.
Yeah, have a good night.